Shut your mouth and sit back down, Roy. If you reach for that briefcase again, I will let the state troopers waiting in the lobby come up here and explain what happens to people who try to cross state lines with $300,000 of stolen corporate funds. The words came out of my mouth without an ounce of hesitation, cold and sharp. I didn't need to yell. The silence that followed in that high-rise office was louder than any scream. Christina's hand froze halfway to her designer purse. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief, her perfect makeup suddenly looking like a mask melting under intense heat. She looked from me to Roy, hoping her partner in crime would have some brilliant comeback, some loophole they had discussed during their late-night planning sessions. But Roy just sat there, his face turning an ugly shade of gray, his fingers trembling against the polished mahogany of the conference table.
"Jacob, please," Christina whispered, her voice cracking. "You're making a huge mistake. We were just organizing the payroll assets. We can explain everything. It is not what it looks like."
"It is exactly what it looks like," I said, leaning forward and resting my forearms on the table. "Actually, it is worse. You thought I was still in Chicago dealing with the regional audit. You thought you had at least another 48 hours to clear out the remaining accounts, sign over the deed to the warehouse, and leave me holding the bag for a $500,000 tax discrepancy. But I have been back since Tuesday morning, Christina, and I've spent the last 3 days watching every single move you two made." The realization hit her like a physical blow. She sunk back into her chair, her confidence evaporating. For 2 years, she had been my wife, and for 3 years, Roy had been my head of operations. They thought they were the smartest people in the room.
They thought because I was quiet, because I focused on the hard work while they handled the public-facing side of our logistics firm, that I was blind. They had mistaken my decency for weakness. That was their first mistake. Their second was assuming I didn't know how to fight back. "You don't have anything on us," Roy growled, trying to summon whatever courage he had left. He adjusted his collar, but his voice lacked any real bite. "The transfers were authorized. I have power of attorney for the secondary accounts. You signed those papers yourself 6 months ago when you had that surgery." I couldn't help but smile, a dry, humorless smirk that made Roy's eyes twitch. "I signed a power of attorney that was limited to operational expenses up to $20,000, Roy. Do you want to know what I did when I got back on Tuesday? I went to the bank. The real bank, not the online portal you've been manipulating. I met with the regional director. It turns out, when you try to transfer $450,000 into a newly formed offshore shell company registered in Panama under your sister's maiden name, they flag it. Especially when the IP address used to initiate the transfer belongs to a luxury hotel downtown, where you and my wife have been checking in every Thursday afternoon." Christina let out a sharp gasp, covering her mouth. Her eyes darted to the window, as if she were looking for an escape route 30 floors up. "You've been busy, Christina," I continued, turning my gaze to her. "All those weekend trips to visit your mother. I didn't realize your mother lived in a penthouse suite overlooking the harbor. I also didn't realize she looked exactly like Roy. The private investigator I hired was very thorough. The photos are incredibly clear. The lighting in that hotel lobby is excellent." "Jacob, listen to me," she pleaded, reaching across the table to try and touch my hand. I pulled back, refusing to let her poison me with her touch again. "We can talk about this. We can fix this. We don't have to involve the police. We can settle this between us. Think about what we built together." "What we built?" I laughed, and the sound echoed off the glass walls. "I built this company. My father and I spent 15 years sweating over every single delivery, every single contract, while you were complaining about the color of the office carpet. When I married you, I thought I was bringing someone into my life who would share the load. Instead, I brought in a parasite. And Roy here was more than happy to help you feed on what was left." Roy stood up suddenly, slamming his hands on the table. "Enough of this! You think you're so smart? We have the signatures, Jacob. Even if the bank flagged the transfer, the ownership transfer of the main fleet is already processed. The trucks are in our name now. You can't touch them without a lengthy court battle, and by the time you get a court date, your clients will have jumped ship because you won't have the rigs to move their cargo. You'll be bankrupt in a month." I looked up at him, admiring his desperation. It was almost pathetic how much he relied on a lie he had repeated to himself to feel strong. "Sit down, Roy," I said softly, my voice dripping with pity. "Before you make yourself look even more stupid." He didn't sit, but he didn't speak either. He just stood there, chest heaving, waiting for me to deliver the blow he knew was coming. "You really think I didn't check the DMV registry?" I asked. You used a forged digital signature to transfer the titles of 22 commercial trucks. You did it on Wednesday afternoon at 2 in the afternoon. What you didn't know is that on Wednesday morning at 9, I had already filed an emergency injunction and a notice of corporate fraud with the Secretary of State.
The moment you uploaded those forged documents, you didn't transfer the trucks. You committed a felony, a very documented, very traceable federal offense, because those trucks cross state lines daily for interstate commerce. The silence returned, heavier this time. Roy's hands slid off the table, and he collapsed back into his chair as if his legs could no longer support his weight. I didn't just stop there, I said, taking a thick folder from my leather bag and tossing it onto the table. It slid across the wood and stopped right in front of Christina. Open it. With trembling fingers, she opened the folder. The first page was a copy of a police report. Her eyes darted across the text, and her face went completely white. "What is this?" she whispered. "That is a police report from 3 weeks ago," I said. "A hit and run in the North District. A pedestrian was struck by a black luxury SUV. The driver fled the scene. The victim suffered a broken collarbone and a severe concussion. The police have been looking for the vehicle." "What does this have to do with us?" Roy asked, though his voice had gone completely flat. "The SUV involved was registered to our company," I explained, looking directly at Roy. "Your company car, Roy. The one you claim was in the shop that week. But here's the interesting part. The dashcam in that vehicle wasn't disabled like you thought it was. It was writing to a cloud backup that I pay for. I have the footage of you, Roy, behind the wheel, smelling like cheap whiskey, laughing with Christina in the passenger seat, right before you clipped that teenager on his bicycle and sped off." You can't prove that," Roy stammered, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. The camera was working perfectly," I interrupted. "And the cloud server doesn't lie. I already delivered a copy of the high-definition footage to the precinct this morning. The detectives were very interested. They were actually surprised you hadn't tried to hide the car better. It's sitting in the secondary lot behind the terminal right now, with the dent in the front fender still clearly visible." Christina began to sob, her head dropping into her hands. "Jacob, please. I didn't know he hit someone. I swear, I thought it was just a guardrail. He told me it was a guardrail." "You were in the passenger seat, Christina," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "The audio on the recording is very clear. You told him to keep driving because you didn't want the police to see how drunk you both were. You literally said, 'Drive, Roy, don't stop, nobody saw us.' I believe that makes you an accessory after the fact, on top of the conspiracy to commit grand theft and corporate fraud." Roy looked like he wanted to vomit. The arrogance he had carried into this room, the swagger of a man who thought he had successfully stolen another man's life, was entirely gone. He was just a coward who had run out of lies. "So, here's how this is going to go," I said, standing up and buttoning my suit jacket. I looked down at the two of them, feeling nothing but a profound sense of relief that the garbage was finally being cleared out of my life. "You are going to sign these confession statements I had my attorney draft. They outline the unauthorized financial transfers, the forgery of the truck titles, and the theft of company assets. If you sign them right now, I will instruct my legal team to cooperate with the district attorney regarding your sentencing recommendations for the financial crimes. It might mean 5 years instead of 15. "And what about the hit and run?" Roy asked, his voice barely a whisper. "That is out of my hands," I replied. "The police are already on their way up. They have the warrant for your arrest, Roy. And Christina, they have a warrant for you as well." "You have about 3 minutes before they walk through those double doors."
"You planned this," Christina sobbed, looking up at me with tear-stained eyes. "You knew everything all along. You just let us keep going." "I wanted to make sure you built a hole deep enough that you could never climb out of it," I said. "And you did a beautiful job. You worked so hard to ruin me, and all you did was secure your own destruction." The sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the hallway outside. The glass doors of the reception area clicked open, followed by the firm, authoritative voices of the state troopers asking for Roy and Christina by their full names. I picked up my briefcase, took the folder with the evidence, and walked toward the door. I paused for a brief moment, looking back at the two people who had spent months plotting my downfall. "Have a good life, you two," I said. "You'll have plenty of time to talk about what we built while you're wearing matching orange jumpsuits." I opened the door, stepped out into the hallway, and nodded to the 4 officers waiting there. As they brushed past me to enter the conference room, I felt the cool breeze of the air conditioning on my face. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt completely free. I walked down the long corridor toward the elevators, the rhythmic sound of my shoes on the marble floor the only noise in the quiet hallway. I pressed the button for the lobby, When the doors slid open, I stepped inside and looked at my reflection in the polished steel walls. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like a man who had taken control of his destiny, who had refused to let betrayers dictate the terms of his life. Downstairs, the morning sun was bright, casting long shadows across the bustling plaza.
I walked out of the building, breathed in the fresh air, and realized that my real life was finally about to begin. I decided to take a walk. The office was behind me, the chaos was behind me, and the two people who had tried to destroy everything I cared about were currently being handcuffed in a room high above the city. I crossed the street, heading toward the small park near the waterfront, where my father and I used to eat lunch when we first started the business. The park was quiet, save for the occasional jogger and the sound of waves gently lapping against the stone harbor wall. I found an empty bench under a large oak tree and sat down, letting the weight of the last few weeks finally lift from my shoulders. I thought about the early days of the company. My father had started with just one old flatbed truck and a dream of providing a stable future for our family. He had taught me that honesty and hard work were the only things that truly mattered in business. If you take care of your people, Jacob, and you do what you say you're going to do, the rest will take care of itself, he used to say. When he passed away 5 years ago, I took over the reins with the sole intention of honoring his legacy. I had expanded the fleet, secured major contracts, and built a reputation for reliability that was unmatched in the tri-state area. We were known as the company that never missed a deadline, the team that always delivered no matter the circumstances. And then came Christina. We met at a charity gala 3 years ago. She was beautiful, charming, and possessed an energy that seemed to light up any room she entered. I was a quiet, practical man, and her vibrant personality drew me in like a moth to a flame. Within a year, we were married. I thought I had found the missing piece of my life, a partner who would share in my successes and support me through the challenges. But it didn't take long for the cracks to appear.
Christina's lifestyle was expensive, far more expensive than the comfortable but sensible life I had built. She wanted a larger house in the most exclusive neighborhood, luxury cars, designer clothes, and vacations to exotic locations that I simply didn't have the time to take. I tried to accommodate her, thinking that she was just adjusting to our new life together, but her demands only grew. At the same time, the business was expanding, and I needed help managing the operations. That was when I hired Roy. He came highly recommended, with an impressive resume and an aggressive, confident demeanor that I thought would complement my more cautious approach. I gave him full control of the daily logistics, trusting him to keep the trucks running while I focused on securing new contracts and managing the finances. I didn't realize that by bringing Roy into the company, I was inviting a fox into the henhouse. It started with small things, a missing invoice here, an unexplained expense there. Roy always had a logical explanation, and because I was busy with the expansion, I didn't press him as hard as I should have. I trusted him. He was my head of operations after all. Then, the rumors started. Some of our long-term drivers mentioned seeing Roy and Christina together at local restaurants during the day, looking far more familiar than a wife and an employee should. I dismissed it at first, telling myself that they were just working on a marketing project or discussing company events. I didn't want to believe that the two people I trusted most in the world could be betraying me. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and once it took root, it was impossible to ignore. I began to pay closer attention to the company's financial records. I noticed that several of our major clients were being billed through a secondary routing system that I hadn't authorized.
When I questioned Roy about it, he claimed it was a temporary measure to expedite payments during a transition to a new banking software. It sounded plausible, but my gut told me otherwise. I decided to hire a private investigator, a retired police detective named Marcus, who was known for his discretion and thoroughness. I told him to look into Roy's financial dealings and to keep an eye on Christina's activities when I was out of town. The reports Marcus sent back over the next few weeks were a devastating blow. He discovered that Roy had set up a dummy corporation, a shell company registered in Panama under his sister's maiden name. Roy had been systematically diverting payments from our regular clients into this offshore account, hiding the transactions through forged invoices and manipulated accounting software. Over the course of 6 months, he had managed to siphon off nearly $300,000 of corporate funds. But the financial betrayal was only half of the story. Marcus also provided undeniable proof of the affair between Roy and Christina. He sent me high-definition photographs and video footage of them entering and leaving a luxury downtown hotel, dining at secluded restaurants, and behaving like a couple deeply in love. They weren't just stealing my money. They were laughing at me behind my back, using my hard-earned success to fund their secret life together.
The pain of that realization was intense, a burning anger that threatened to consume me. I wanted to confront them immediately, to throw them out of my office and my home, to watch them burn. But I knew that if I acted on impulse, they would find a way to escape. Roy was clever, and Christina was a master of manipulation. If I didn't play my cards perfectly, they would find a loophole, tie me up in legal proceedings, and potentially ruin the company my father and I had worked so hard to build. So I decided to wait. I played the part of the clueless, trusting husband and business partner. I went to work every day, smiled at Roy, came home to Christina, and pretended that everything was normal. It was the hardest thing I have ever had to do, but I knew that every day I waited was another day they would use to incriminate themselves further. I let them believe their plan was working. I even signed a limited power of attorney that Roy claimed he needed to handle operational expenses while I was traveling. I knew he would try to use it to drain the remaining accounts, and that would be the final nail in his coffin. The climax of their scheme came when they planned to transfer $450,000 from our main reserve account and sign over the titles of our entire commercial fleet to their dummy corporation. They had scheduled the transactions to coincide with my trip to Chicago for a regional audit, thinking I would be too distracted to notice. But I didn't go to Chicago. I had my attorney handle the audit remotely, and I returned to the city early, spending 3 days in a small motel near our terminal, working with Marks and my legal team to finalize the evidence against them. We discovered that Roy had forged my digital signature to transfer the truck titles, a major federal offense. And then we got the break we needed, the hit-and-run report. When Marcus showed me the police report about the teenager who had been struck by a black luxury SUV, I immediately checked the GPS and dashcam data for Roy's company vehicle. It was a long shot, but I knew Roy was careless. Sure enough, the data confirmed that the vehicle had been in the exact location of the accident at the exact time it occurred. The dashcam had recorded the entire incident, including the conversation between Roy and Christina as they fled the scene. They were both heavily intoxicated, and their panic was captured in high-definition audio and video. With that final piece of evidence, the trap was complete. I set up the meeting in our high-rise conference room, inviting Roy and Christina to join me for what they thought would be a routine discussion about the company's quarterly performance. They walked in expecting to finalize their escape, completely unaware that the walls were closing in on them. And now, it was over. I stood up from the park bench, took a deep breath, and looked out over the harbor. The sun was high in the sky, reflecting off the water in thousands of tiny, sparkling points of light. The future was unwritten, but for the first time in years, it belonged entirely to me. I walked back toward the city, my mind already turning to the work that needed to be done. I had a company to rebuild, clients to reassure, and a legacy to protect. It wouldn't be easy, but I was ready for the challenge. I was a man who had faced the worst kind of betrayal and emerged stronger. A man who had taken control of his life and refused to be a victim. As I made my way through the busy streets, I felt a sense of pride that had nothing to do with money or success. It was the pride of knowing that I had stayed true to my father's principles, that I had fought for what was mine with honor and intelligence, and that the people who had tried to destroy me were finally facing the consequences of their actions. The ultimate payback wasn't just about watching them get arrested. It was about reclaiming my freedom, my dignity, and my future. And as I walked into the bright afternoon, I knew that I had won. I spent the next several days working tirelessly at the office. I had to meet with our banking partners to ensure that the flagged accounts were secured and that our daily operations could continue without interruption. The bank directors were incredibly cooperative once they saw the evidence of the fraud, and they worked quickly to restore full access to our operational funds. I also held an all-hands meeting with our drivers and terminal staff. I stood before them in the main warehouse, looking at the faces of the men and women who kept our trucks moving every single day. I told them the truth, not the sordid details of the affair, but the facts of the attempted financial theft and the forgery of the truck titles. The company is safe, I told them, my voice strong and clear. The funds have been secured, the titles have been restored to our name, and the person responsible for trying to steal your livelihoods is currently in police custody. We are going to keep moving forward, just like we always have. Your jobs are secure, and your paychecks will be deposited on time, as they always are. I appreciate your hard work and your loyalty, and I promise you that I will continue to lead this company with the same honesty and respect that my father did. A loud cheer went up from the drivers, and several of them came up to shake my hand after the meeting. Their support meant more to me than any financial recovery. They were the backbone of this business, and knowing that they trusted me was all the validation I needed. My legal team worked quickly to finalize the divorce proceedings from Christina.
Under the terms of our prenuptial agreement, which included a strict infidelity and criminal activity clause, she was left with absolutely nothing. The luxury house we had shared was put up for sale, and her personal accounts were frozen as part of the ongoing investigation into the corporate theft. As for Roy, his legal troubles were only beginning.
The district attorney's office was pursuing multiple felony charges against him, including grand larceny, forgery, conspiracy, and leaving the scene of an accident involving personal injury. The evidence we had provided was so overwhelming that his attorney was already trying to negotiate a plea deal to avoid a trial that would surely result in a lengthy prison sentence. I didn't care what kind of deal he got, as long as he was far away from my company and my life. One evening, about a month after the confrontation in the conference room, I was sitting in my office late, reviewing the latest shipping manifests. The office was quiet, the only sound the gentle hum of the computer and the distant city traffic below. There was a soft knock on the door, and my administrative assistant, Sarah, walked in, holding a small cardboard box. "Jacob, this just arrived by courier," she said, placing the box on my desk. "It's from the police department. They said it's some personal items that were recovered from Roy's desk and company car during the investigation." "Thank you, Sarah," I said, offering her a warm smile. "You can head home for the evening. I'll see you tomorrow." "Good night, Jacob," she said, closing the door behind her. I looked at the box for a long moment, wondering what could be inside. I opened it and began sorting through the contents. Some old files, a set of keys, a leather-bound notebook with Roy's handwriting on the pages. And then, at the bottom of the box, I found a small, silver thumb drive. I picked it up, recognizing it as one of the secure drives we used for storing sensitive client data. I plugged it into my computer, expecting to find more evidence of financial transactions or client lists that Roy had tried to steal. Instead, the drive contained a single folder labeled Project Blue. Intrigued, I opened the folder. Inside were several digital documents, blueprints, and market analysis reports. As I read through them, a chill ran down my spine. Roy hadn't just been planning to steal our money and our trucks. He had been working with a rival logistics firm, a large national competitor that had been trying to break into our regional market for years. The documents outlined a plan to systematically dismantle our company from the inside out. Roy had been sharing our confidential client rates, our route efficiencies, and our driver pay structures with the competitor. In exchange, they had promised him a senior executive position and a substantial equity stake in their new regional division once our company went bankrupt and they acquired our assets for pennies on the dollar. The betrayal was far deeper and more calculated than I had ever imagined. It wasn't just a crime of opportunity. It was a deliberate, organized attempt to destroy my father's legacy and throw dozens of hard-working people out of work, all for Roy's personal gain. I felt a sudden rush of anger, but it was quickly replaced by a profound sense of satisfaction. Their plan had failed. The rival firm's involvement was now documented, and I had the evidence to prove it. I immediately drafted an email to my legal counsel, attaching the contents of the thumb drive. This information would not only secure Roy's conviction, but it would also give us the grounds to file a massive, tortious interference lawsuit against the competitor, potentially securing our market position for years to come. I leaned back in my chair, looking out the window at the city lights. They had thought I was weak because I was decent. They had thought they could take everything I cared about because I didn't shout or boast or play the games they did. But they had forgotten that quiet water runs deep, and that a man who fights for his family, his people, and his honor is a formidable opponent. I closed the folder on my computer, ejected the thumb drive, and placed it safely in my pocket. I stood up, turned off the office lights, and locked the door behind me. As I walked out of the building and stepped into the cool night air, I looked up at the stars, feeling a deep, abiding peace. The battle was won, the company was secure, and the future was brighter than it had ever been. I walked down the street, my steps light and confident, ready to face whatever lay ahead. I had survived the storm, and I had emerged not just a survivor, but a victor. And as I made my way home through the quiet streets of the city, I knew that my father would be proud. The next morning, the sun rose over the harbor, casting a warm, golden glow across the terminal. The trucks were lined up, their engines idling in a powerful, steady rumble that shook the ground. The drivers were busy checking their manifests, securing their loads, and preparing for the day's runs. I stood on the loading dock, a cup of hot coffee in my hand, watching the scene with a sense of quiet satisfaction. This was the heart of the business, the physical manifestation of the hard work and dedication that defined us. "Morning, boss. One of our veteran drivers, a man named Carl, who had worked with my father for 20 years, said as he walked past, "Looks like a busy day ahead." "It always is, Carl," I replied, raising my cup to him. "Stay safe out there." "You too, Jacob," he said, climbing into the cab of his rig and pulling the door shut. The massive diesel engine roared to life, and the truck slowly moved forward, heading toward the main gate and the highway beyond. One by one, the other trucks followed, a long, powerful line of steel and rubber moving out to deliver on our promises. I watched them go until the last truck had disappeared from view, leaving only the quiet of the morning and the promise of a new day.
I took a sip of my coffee, turned around, and walked back toward the office. There was still a lot of work to do, but for the first time in a very long time, I was looking forward to every single minute of it. I spent the rest of the day in meetings with our legal team and our financial advisors, drafting the formal complaint against the rival firm that had conspired with Roy. The lawyers were confident that we had an airtight case, and they were eager to file the lawsuit. "This is going to send a shockwave through the industry, Jacob," my lead attorney, a sharp, experienced woman named Helen, said as she reviewed the documents. "They thought they could steal your market share, and now they're going to end up paying you millions in damages." "I don't care about the money, Helen," I told her. "I just want to make sure that everyone in this business knows that you can't build your success on someone else's destruction. I want to make sure they never try anything like this again." "They won't," she promised. "Once this gets out, they'll be lucky to keep their doors open." I left the lawyer's office late in the afternoon, feeling a sense of closure that had been missing for weeks. The legal battles would take time, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. I decided to take the long way home, walking through the quiet streets of the historical district, where the old brick warehouses had been converted into trendy shops and restaurants. The area was lively, filled with people enjoying the warm evening air, laughing and talking as they walked past. I found myself standing in front of a small, quiet restaurant that my father and I used to visit on special occasions. It was a cozy, family-run Italian place with excellent food and a warm, welcoming atmosphere. I decided to go inside. The owner, an older man named Marco, who had known my father for decades, greeted me with a warm smile and a firm handshake. "Jacob, it is so good to see you," he said, leading me to a quiet table in the corner. "It has been too long. Your father, he would be so proud of how you are running the business. We hear the news. We know you are doing well." "Thank you, Marco," I said, sitting down and unfolding my napkin. "It's been a crazy few weeks, but things are finally settling down." Good, he said, patting my shoulder. "You deserve the best, Jacob. You are a good man, just like your father. Tonight, the dinner is on me. You must try the lasagna. It is my wife's special recipe." "I would love that," I said, feeling a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. As I ate my dinner, surrounded by the comfortable noise of the restaurant and the delicious smell of garlic and olive oil, I realized that this was what truly mattered. Not the fancy penthouses or the luxury cars that Christina had wanted, but the simple, real connections with good people who respected you for who you were. I had lost a wife and a business partner, but I had kept my self-respect, my honor, and the trust of my community. I had protected my father's legacy and secured the future of the people who depended on me. That was the real victory. I finished my meal, thanked Marco and his wife for their hospitality, and walked out into the cool, dark night. The city lights were bright, reflecting off the damp pavement from a brief evening shower. I walked back to my apartment, a quiet, comfortable space that I had moved into after selling the house. It was smaller than the home I had shared with Christina, but it was mine, and it felt more like home than that hollow mansion ever had. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and tossed my keys on the table. The apartment was quiet, but it wasn't a lonely quiet. It was a peaceful, restful silence that allowed me to finally relax. I poured myself a glass of water and walked over to the window, looking out at the city skyline. Far below, the traffic moved in steady, silent streams of red and white lights, a constant, pulsing reminder of the life that was always moving forward. I thought about Roy and Christina, wondering where they were at this exact moment. They were likely sitting in cold, sterile jail cells, waiting for their next court date, realizing that the life they had tried to steal had vanished like smoke. I felt no pity for them, only a profound sense of justice. They had made their choices, and now they had to live with the consequences. I turned away from the window, walked into the bedroom, and got ready for sleep. Tomorrow would be another busy day, with more challenges to face and more decisions to make. But I knew that I was ready for whatever came my way. I climbed into bed, pulled the covers up, and closed my eyes.
As I drifted off to sleep, the rhythm of my breathing matched the steady, quiet hum of the city outside. A peaceful reminder that the storm had passed and that I was finally home. The weeks turned into months, and the seasons began to change. The cool breeze of autumn arrived, painting the trees in brilliant shades of red, orange, and gold. The air was crisp and fresh, and the harbor waters turned a deep, dark blue. The business continued to thrive. We had secured several new contracts, expanding our operations into the neighboring states and adding 10 new trucks to our fleet. The drivers were working hard, the terminals were running smoothly, and our reputation for reliability had never been stronger. The lawsuit against our rival competitor was progressing rapidly, with their legal team already offering a substantial settlement to avoid the public embarrassment and financial ruin of a trial. My attorneys were reviewing the terms, ensuring that we got every single dollar we deserved, and that the settlement included strict non-compete clauses that would protect our market position for the foreseeable future. Christina's divorce was finalized, and she had vanished from the city, reportedly moving back to her home state to live with her sister, broke and humiliated. Roy's trial had ended in a plea agreement. He was sentenced to 7 years in a state penitentiary for grand larceny, forgery, and his role in the hit-and-run accident. He would have plenty of time to contemplate his mistakes while sitting behind concrete walls. One Saturday morning, I decided to drive out to the cemetery where my father was buried. It was a beautiful, quiet place on a hill overlooking the valley, surrounded by ancient maple trees that were shedding their colorful leaves in the gentle wind. I walked through the quiet paths until I reached his headstone. It was a simple, elegant piece of gray granite, inscribed with his name, his dates of birth and death, and the words, "A loving father, a man of honor." I stood before the grave for a long moment, the wind rustling the dry leaves at my feet. I reached down and cleared away some small branches and leaves that had fallen onto the stone, making sure it looked clean and respected. "We did it, Dad," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "We saved the company. They tried to take it, but we were stronger. We kept the trucks rolling, and we kept our promises to the people who trust us. I didn't let them ruin what you built." I stood there in the quiet of the morning, feeling a deep, comforting connection to the man who had taught me everything I knew. I could almost hear his voice in the wind, telling me that I had done well, that I had acted with honor, and that he was proud of the man I had become. I took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air, offered a final nod of respect to the headstone, and turned to walk back to my car. The future was bright, the road ahead was clear, and I was ready to drive. I had faced the darkest betrayal, survived the storm, and reclaimed my life. I was Jacob, a man who had proved that honesty and strength were the only things that truly lasted, and that the ultimate payback was simply living a good, successful, and honorable life. I got into my truck, started the engine, and drove down the hill, heading back toward the city and the endless possibilities that lay ahead.